They say a jealous heart can dig a pit so deep that even the earth trembles. In the village of Umuaka, Mama Ngozi believed she had set the perfect trap for her gentle daughter-in-law Chiamaka. By morning, the whole village would condemn her. But that night, under the quiet watch of the ancestors, a small pair of eyes saw everything. The child was no ordinary child. Before we continue, tell us in the comments, where are you watching this story from? In the eastern lands of Nigeria, where red earth clings to the feet and palm trees whispers secrets to the wind, there stood a quiet village called Umuaka. It was a place where the living never forgot the presence of the ancestors. Every path, every river bend, and every shrine carried stories older than memory itself. In Umuaka, people believed that truth could never remain hidden forever. The ancestors watched, and when the time was right, they revealed what human eyes could not see. Among the villagers lived a young woman named Chiamaka. Chiamaka was known for her gentle heart and tireless hands. She woke before the first rooster crowed each morning, sweeping the compound, fetching water from the stream, and preparing food for the household before the sun had fully risen above the trees. She had married Obinna, a hard-working carpenter, whose skill with wood had earned him respect beyond the village. But work was scarce in Umuaka, and like many young men, Obinna often traveled far away to the bustling city of Lagos, where construction sites offered better pay. Whenever he left, Chiamaka remained behind in the family compound with his mother, and that was where her greatest trouble lived. Obinna's mother, Mama Ngozi, was a woman of sharp pride and a sharper tongue. She carried herself like a queen of the compound, and she believed that her son deserved a wife who would bring wealth and status to the family. But Chiamaka had brought none of those things. She came with no cattle, no gold, and no powerful relatives. She came only with humility and kindness. To Mama Ngozi, that was not enough. She smiles too much. Mama Ngozi would mutter to neighbors at the market, "A woman who smiles that much must be hiding something." Yet the villagers often saw something very different. They saw how Chiamaka cared for the elderly woman in the next compound when she fell sick. They saw how she shared food with hungry children who passed by the gates. They saw how she carried herself with quiet dignity, even when Mama Ngozi scolded her loudly in front of others. And slowly people in Umuaka began to respect her. That respect burned in Mama Ngozi's heart, like dry firewood. Not long after Obinna and Chiamaka married, a child was born into the compound, a small boy with bright, curious eyes. They named him Chidubem. From the moment of his birth, the elders whispered among themselves. The child rarely cried like other babies. Instead, he watched. His eyes moved slowly around the room, as if he could see things no one else could. Old Eneka, one of the oldest women in the village, held the baby once and stared into his eyes for a long moment. Then she said quietly, "This child carries the gaze of the ancestors." The words spread quickly through Umuaka. Some people said the boy was blessed. Others said such children were dangerous. But Mama Ngozi felt only discomfort. The boy often stared at her in a way that made her uneasy. Sometimes he would point at empty corners of the compound and giggle softly. Other times he would speak strange things that made the adults fall silent. One evening when the sky turned orange with sunset, the little boy tugged gently on his mother's wrapper. Mother Chidubem said softly. Chiamaka looked down and smiled. "Yes, my son." The boy pointed toward the small ancestral shrine at the edge of the compound. "The old ones are watching." Chiamaka laughed nervously and stroked his head. But Mama Ngozi, who had been sitting nearby, grinding pepper, froze for a brief moment. She did not like the way the child spoke. She did not like the way his eyes seemed to look through people. And deep inside her heart, a dangerous thought began to grow. Because Mama Ngozi had already decided something. One day soon, Chiamaka would no longer live in her compound. And when that day came, the whole village would believe that it was Chiamaka's own fault. What Mama Ngozi did not know was this. The ancestors had already chosen someone to witness the truth, and that witness was still a child. In Umuaka, elders often said that children sometimes carried messages from places adults could no longer see. But when such children were born, people also grew uneasy. For not every message from the spirit world was meant to be comfortable. Little Chidubem grew quickly, but he remained different from other children in the village. While other boys chased goats through dusty paths or threw stones into the river, Chidubem often sat quietly beneath the old udara tree in the compound. His small fingers would draw shapes in the red earth, and sometimes he would whisper to himself as if someone were answering him. At first, Chiamaka thought it was only childish imagination. But then, strange things began to happen. One afternoon, dark clouds were still far beyond the hills, when Chidubem tugged at his mother's wrapper. "Mother," he said softly, "bring the yams inside." Chiamaka looked up at the bright sky and laughed gently. "There is no rain today, my son." But the boy shook his head. "The wind is already speaking to the trees." Something in his calm voice made Chiamaka pause. She gathered the yams anyway and carried them inside. An hour later, a heavy storm burst over Umuaka without warning. Rain pounded the roofs of the houses, and the wind bent the palm trees until their leaves scraped against each other like restless spirits. That was the first time Chiamaka felt a small chill crawl down her spine. The second time happened near the forest shrine. One evening, as they passed the narrow path that led to the ancestral shrine, Chidubem suddenly stopped walking, his eyes fixed on the wooden carvings that guarded the entrance. "Mother," he whispered, "the old ones are not happy." Chiamaka looked around nervously. The path was empty, and the shrine stood silent beneath the tall trees. "Do not speak like that," she murmured. "The ancestors hear everything." But Chidubem continued staring. "They say someone in this compound carries a dark heart." That night, Chiamaka could not sleep well. Yet, not everyone in the village feared the boy's strange awareness. Old Neka, whose back was bent with age, but whose mind remained sharp as a hunter's blade, believed there was something sacred about the child. She had seen such children before in her long life. One morning, she called Chiamaka aside at the market. "Your son sees more than we do," Neka said quietly. Chiamaka lowered her eyes. "People are beginning to talk, Mama." "Let them talk," Neka replied. "Some children are born with the ears of the ancestors. They come when truth needs protection." Those words gave Chiamaka comfort. But in the same compound, another heart was growing colder. Mama Ngozi watched the boy carefully. At first, she only disliked the way he stared at her. But soon, the uneasiness turned into something darker. Suspicion. Sometimes, she would enter the compound and find the child already watching her as if he knew where she had been. Other times, when she spoke harshly to Chiamaka, the boy's eyes would narrow, with a strange seriousness that felt far too old for his small face. Mama Ngozi began telling people in the village disturbing things. "That child is not normal," she whispered at the market. "Sometimes spirit children bring misfortune." The rumors spread quickly through Umuaka. Soon, whenever Chidubem passed by, some women would quietly pull their children closer. Chiamaka felt the weight of their stares, but she endured it silently, just as she endured Mama Ngozi's constant scolding. Still, the tension inside the compound grew thicker with every passing day. And Mama Ngozi's resentment grew deeper, because the more people doubted the boy, the more they respected Chiamaka. To Mama Ngozi, that was unbearable. Jealousy is a seed that grows quickly in a heart already filled with pride. And in Mama Ngozi's heart, that seed had begun to grow into something dangerous. Something that would soon lead her down a path she could never return from. For somewhere in the quiet corners of her mind, a plan had begun to form. A plan that would remove Chiamaka from the compound forever. What Mama Ngozi did not realize was that the child she feared most would soon become the one person standing between her lies and the truth. In Umuaka, respect was a quiet kind of wealth. It did not come from gold or cattle, but from the way a person carried their heart before others. And slowly, without trying, Chiamaka was becoming rich in that kind of wealth. The women at the market began greeting her warmly when she arrived with her basket of cassava and peppers. Children ran to her when they scraped their knees or lost their sandals along the dusty road. Even the elders sometimes nodded approvingly when they saw how diligently she worked in the compound. But every word of praise that reached Chiamaka's ears sounded like thunder inside Mama Ngozi's heart. The older woman had once been the most respected woman in the compound. For many years, people came to her for advice. Her voice had carried weight in village gatherings. Her opinions shaped family decisions. Now things were beginning to change. People spoke about Chiamaka instead, and Mama Ngozi hated it. One afternoon, when the sun hung heavy above the village, a sudden cry echoed from the well near the edge of the compound. A small girl named Adaeze, the daughter of a neighboring family, had slipped while drawing water. Her foot lost balance, and she tumbled halfway into the deep well. The bucket rope tangled around her arms as she screamed. Villagers rushed toward the well, shouting in panic. The well was deep, and no one dared lean too far over its crumbling edge. Before anyone could decide what to do, Chiamaka pushed through the crowd. "Hold the rope steady," she shouted. Without hesitation, she wrapped the rope around her arms and carefully lowered herself partway into the well. The cool darkness swallowed her halfway as she reached for the terrified child. "Do not cry," Chiamaka whispered. "I have you." The crowd held their breath. Moments later, she lifted Adaeze safely out of the well and into the waiting arms of her mother. The girl clung to Chiamaka, sobbing with relief. "May the ancestors bless you." Adaeze's mother cried, holding Chiamaka's hands with gratitude. By evening, the story had spread through every corner of Umuaka. Chiamaka saved the child. She did not even hesitate. She has a brave heart. But while the village praised her, Mama Ngozi sat silently inside the compound, grinding pepper with sharp, angry movements. The sound of the grinding stones scraped harshly against the bowl. Each word of praise for Chiamaka felt like an insult. When night fell and the compound grew quiet, Mama Ngozi sat outside beneath the dim moonlight, her thoughts twisting like tangled vines. "She is turning the village against me," she muttered under her breath. The more people admired Chiamaka, the smaller Mama Ngozi felt. And pride is a dangerous thing when it begins to feel threatened. A few days later, Mama Ngozi took a path she had not walked in many years. The narrow trail led deep into the forests beyond the farms. There, hidden among thick trees and creeping vines, lived a woman known throughout the region. Her name was Mama Ifunanya. Some people called her a healer. Others called her something far more dangerous. When Mama Ngozi reached the small hut surrounded by hanging herbs and strange wooden charms, Mama Ifunanya was already waiting. It was as if she had known someone would come. "What troubles your heart, Mama Ngozi?" the herbalist asked, her voice slow and knowing. Mama Ngozi hesitated for a moment. Then the bitterness inside her spilled out like poison. "There is a woman in my house," she said coldly, "and the village loves her more than they respect me." Mama Ifunanya watched her quietly. "And what do you want?" the herbalist asked. Mama Ngozi's eyes hardened. "I want her gone." The herbalist leaned back slowly. "There are many ways for a person to leave a village," she said. Mama Ngozi leaned forward. What kind of way? Mama Ifunanya's eyes flickered toward the distant direction of the village shrine. "If a woman is accused of stealing from the ancestral shrine, the elders will send her away without mercy." The words hung heavily in the air. Mama Ngozi felt something dark awaken in her heart. A dangerous idea. And in that moment, the seed of jealousy finally grew into something far worse. A plan. A trap that would destroy Chiamaka forever. Or so Mama Ngozi believed. The elders of Umuaka often said that when a person allows jealousy to guide their hands, even the night begins to listen. A few nights after her visit to Mama Ifunanya, Mama Ngozi sat alone in the courtyard of the compound. The moon was thin and pale above the palm trees, and most of the village had already fallen asleep. Inside the hut, Chiamaka and little Chidubem rested after a long day of work. The quiet rhythm of their breathing drifted softly through the open window. Mama Ngozi listened for a long moment. Then she slowly stood. Her plan had already grown strong in her mind. The herbalist's words repeated themselves again and again. If someone is accused of stealing from the ancestral shrine, the elders will show no mercy. The shrine of Umuaka was sacred ground. It stood in a clearing at the edge of the forest, guarded by carved wooden figures of ancient warriors and spirits. The villagers believed that the ancestors watched over it day and night. Inside the shrine were objects that no ordinary person was allowed to touch. Among them was a small bronze bracelet worn smooth by generations of priests. It was said that the bracelet represented the protection of the ancestors over the village. To steal such a thing was not just a crime, it was an insult to the spirits themselves. Mama Ngozi wrapped a dark cloth around her shoulders and quietly slipped out of the compound gate. The night air was cool and heavy with the scent of damp earth. Crickets chirped softly, and somewhere in the distance, an owl called from the trees. Mama Ngozi walked quickly along the narrow forest path. Her footsteps were careful, but her heart beat loudly in her chest. When she reached the shrine, clearing the trees parted around the sacred space, the small clay structure stood silent beneath the moonlight. For a moment, Mama Ngozi hesitated. The carved wooden figures seemed to stare down at her, but pride pushed aside her fear. "No one will know," she whispered. She stepped inside the shrine. The air inside felt strangely cold. At the center of the shrine lay the ceremonial objects of the ancestors' carved staffs, ritual bowls, and the bronze bracelet resting upon a woven mat. Mama Ngozi's hand trembled as she reached for it. The metal felt heavy and cool in her palm. A gust of wind rustled through the trees outside, making the shrine door creak softly. Mama Ngozi froze, but nothing else happened. Slowly, she tucked the bracelet into the cloth at her waist. Then, she hurried back toward the village, her heart racing. When she reached the compound, the huts were still dark and silent. Carefully, she stepped inside the storage room where Chiamaka kept her baskets and wrappers. Mama Ngozi moved quickly. She slipped the bronze bracelet deep inside one of Chiamaka's woven bags and covered it beneath folded cloth. When the elders searched the compound tomorrow, they would find it. And once they did, Chiamaka would be accused before the entire village. Mama Ngozi smiled quietly to herself. Her plan was perfect. She turned to leave the room, but as she stepped outside, she suddenly felt something strange. A presence. Mama Ngozi looked toward the corner of the courtyard. At first, she saw nothing. Then the shadow moved slightly. Standing near the old udara tree was a small figure, little Chidubem. The boy's eyes reflected the pale moonlight. He had been awake. He had seen everything. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Mama Ngozi felt an uncomfortable chill run through her body. But then she forced herself to laugh softly. "It is late, child," she said calmly. "Go back to sleep." Chidubem did not move. His eyes remained fixed on her. They were quiet, too quiet. Then the boy spoke in a soft voice. "The ancestors saw you." Mama Ngozi's smile faded. For a moment, fear flickered inside her chest. But she quickly pushed the feeling away. "He is only a child," she muttered to herself. "What can a child do?" And with that, she walked away into the darkness. But behind her, Chidubem remained standing beneath the tree. The night wind stirred the leaves above him. And somewhere deep in the forest, the ancestors were still watching. Morning in Umuaka usually arrived with the laughter of children, the clatter of clay pots, and the soft songs of women preparing the first meal of the day. But on that morning, something felt different. Even the wind seemed to move through the village with unease. Before the sun had fully risen, the village priest Dibia Okafor had already gone to the shrine in the forest to perform the morning rituals. A few minutes later, a loud cry echoed through the trees. The bracelet of the ancestors is gone. His voice carried across the farms and compounds like thunder. Villagers began gathering quickly along the path that led to the shrine. Men whispered to one another. Women covered their mouths in shock. No one in Umwaka had ever dared to steal from the shrine. Such an act was believed to bring misfortune not only to the thief, but to the entire village. Soon, the elders were called together beneath the large Iroko tree in the center of the village square. Dibia Okafor stood before them, his face dark with anger. "The sacred bracelet is missing," he announced. "This is an offense against the ancestors." A deep murmur spread through the crowd. One of the elders, Elder Chukudi, rose slowly to his feet. "If the ancestors have been insulted," he said, "then the truth must be found before the sun sets." And so the search began. Villagers moved from compound to compound, checking baskets, rooms, and storage huts. No place was to be left untouched. When the search party reached the compound of Mama Ngozi, Chiamaka was outside pounding cassava in a wooden mortar. Sweat glistened on her forehead as she greeted the elders respectfully. "What brings you here so early?" she asked politely. Elder Chukudi spoke firmly. "We must search every home." Chiamaka stepped aside immediately. "Please search wherever you wish," she said calmly. Mama Ngozi stood nearby, pretending to look confused and worried. "What terrible thing has happened?" she asked. "The sacred bracelet has been stolen," someone replied. Mama Ngozi gasped dramatically, placing a hand on her chest. "Such wickedness!" she exclaimed. The elders and villagers began searching the compound. They looked inside cooking pots beneath, sleeping mats, and inside woven baskets. Chiamaka continued pounding cassava nervously, though her hands had begun to tremble. Finally, one of the men opened a large woven bag inside the storage hut. He reached inside, then suddenly froze. His face changed. Slowly, he lifted something into the sunlight. The bronze bracelet of the ancestors. A wave of shock spread through the crowd. Gasps echoed through the compound. "Impossible!" It was found in Chiamaka's bag. Chiamaka dropped the wooden pestle from her hands. "What?" she whispered, rushing forward. Her eyes widened in horror when she saw the bracelet. No, this cannot be," she stammered. "I have never touched the shrine." But the murmurs of the villagers had already begun to grow louder. Why else would it be in her bag? The ancestors must be angry. Mama Ngozi shook her head sadly. "I cannot believe this," she said softly, though her eyes remained carefully lowered. "I welcomed her into my home." Chiamaka turned toward her desperately. "Mama, please tell them this is not true," she pleaded. "You know I would never do such a thing." But Mama Ngozi only sighed heavily. "My daughter, I wish I could defend you," she replied slowly. The elders stepped forward. "Chiamaka," Elder Chukudi said gravely, "you have been accused of stealing from the shrine of our ancestors. Such an act cannot be ignored." Tears filled Chiamaka's eyes. "I swear before the ancestors I am innocent," she cried. But suspicion had already spread through the crowd like wildfire. Some villagers shook their heads, others avoided looking at her. Far behind them, near the edge of the courtyard, a small boy stood silently. Chidubem. His dark eyes moved slowly across the faces of the villagers. Then they rested on Mama Ngozi. The boy said nothing, but he remembered the night. He remembered the shrine. He remembered the bracelet hidden in the bag. And deep inside his small heart something stirred, because the ancestors were still watching, and soon the truth would speak. The village square of Umwaka had never felt so heavy with silence. Under the great Iroko tree, the elders sat in a wide circle, while villagers gathered around them in anxious clusters. The red dust beneath their feet seemed to hold its breath, waiting for what would happen next. At the center of the clearing stood Chiamaka. Her hands trembled at her sides and tears streaked down her cheeks. The sacred bronze bracelet rested on a woven mat, before the elders shining faintly in the morning sun like a silent accusation. To be accused of stealing from the shrine was no small matter. It meant disrespect to the ancestors themselves. And in Umuaka, such disrespect carried severe punishment. Elder Chukwudi leaned forward slowly. "Chiamaka," he said in a voice that carried across the entire square, "you have sworn that you did not steal the bracelet." "Yes, Chiamaka," whispered, her voice breaking. "I swear before the ancestors, I have done no such thing." The elder nodded thoughtfully. "But the bracelet was found inside your bag," the crowd murmured. Some villagers looked at Chiamaka with pity. Others looked at her with suspicion. Chiamaka felt her knees weaken. "My elders," she said desperately, "someone must have placed it there." A few people shook their heads. "It is too easy to blame shadows," one man muttered. Mama Ngozi stood a short distance away, her arms folded neatly before her. She lowered her head, pretending to wipe tears from her eyes. "This breaks my heart," she said softly. "I treated her like my own daughter." Chiamaka stared at her in disbelief. But before she could speak again, the priest Dibia Okafor rose slowly to his feet. "The ancestors must not be mocked," he declared. "If the bracelet was found in her possession, then she must answer for it." A wave of agreement rippled through the crowd. Some villagers began whispering that Chiamaka should be sent away before sunset. Others warned that the ancestors might curse the entire village if justice was not served quickly. Chiamaka felt the ground spin beneath her. She thought of Obinna far away in Lagos, unaware of what was happening. She thought of her small son. Her heart broke. Just as Elder Chukwudi began to speak again, a small voice rose from the edge of the crowd. "The ancestors do not like lies." The words were soft, but they cut through the noise like a knife through cloth. Every head turned. Standing beneath the Iroko tree was Chidubem. The boy stepped slowly forward. Dust clung to his bare feet, and his small hands hung quietly by his sides. Mama Ngozi felt a sudden chill creep up her spine. Child Elder Chukwudi said gently, "This is a matter for elders." But Chidubem shook his head. His eyes were calm. "The ancestors showed me," he said. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder. "What is the child saying?" Old Neka leaned forward from her seat among the women. "Let the boy speak," she said firmly. "Some children carry truth from places we cannot see." Chidubem looked toward the elders. Then he pointed slowly across the square, toward Mama Ngozi. A ripple of shock spread through the villagers. Chiamaka gasped softly. Mama Ngozi's face tightened. The night before the bracelet was lost, Chidubem said quietly she walked into the forest. The boy's voice remained steady. She went to the shrine. The crowd fell silent. She took the bracelet. Mama Ngozi's heart began pounding in her chest. But the boy was not finished, and she placed it inside my mother's bag. For a moment, the entire village seemed frozen. Then whispers erupted everywhere. "Did he say Mama Ngozi? That cannot be true." Mama Ngozi stepped forward quickly. "He is only a child," she snapped. Children imagine things, but old Neka stood slowly. Her eyes were sharp despite her age. "Spirit children do not imagine," she said quietly. Then a man near the back of the crowd suddenly spoke. "I saw someone leaving the forest late that night," he said hesitantly. All eyes turned toward him. "At the time I thought nothing of it," he continued. "But now, I believe it was Mama Ngozi." The murmurs grew louder. Mama Ngozi felt the ground beneath her confidence begin to crumble. For the first time since her plan began, fear filled her heart. Because the one witness she had ignored was the one witness the ancestors had chosen. In Umuaka, there is a saying that elders often repeat when the sun begins to set behind the palm trees. The earth may cover a lie for a while, but the ancestors always uncover the truth. That day, beneath the great Iroko tree, those words became more than just a proverb. They became reality. The village square buzzed with whispers as people looked from Chidubem to Mama Ngozi, then back to the bronze bracelet lying before the elders. What had begun as a simple accusation had now turned into something far heavier. Elder Chukwudi slowly rose to his feet again. His face carried the calm weight of a man who had seen many disputes in his lifetime. "Silence," he said firmly. Gradually, the murmurs faded. The elder turned toward Mama Ngozi. "You have heard the child's words," he said, "and another witness has spoken. Before the ancestors and before this village, tell us the truth." Mama Ngozi's hands trembled slightly inside her wrapper. For a moment, pride tried to hold her tongue. But pride is a weak shield when truth has already found its voice. Her eyes moved across the crowd. Faces she had known for years now watched her with suspicion instead of respect. Her authority was slipping away like sand through open fingers. Finally, her shoulders sagged. It was only meant to teach her a lesson," she whispered. A gasp swept through the villagers. Elder Chukwudi's eyes hardened. "You placed the bracelet in Chiamaka's bag." Mama Ngozi lowered her head. Yes. The confession fell heavily over the village square. Chiamaka stood frozen, unable to believe what she had just heard. Tears slowly slid down her cheeks, not from guilt this time, but from the deep wound of betrayal. "I treated you like a mother," she said quietly. Mama Ngozi could not meet her eyes. The elders gathered together for a brief discussion. Their voices were low, but their expressions were serious. After a few moments, Elder Chukwudi spoke again. "Mama Ngozi, you have brought shame upon your family and disrespect upon the ancestors. Because of your jealousy, you tried to destroy an innocent woman." The crowd listened carefully. "For this act," he continued, "you will no longer sit among the council of village women. Your voice will not carry authority in matters of the village until you have proven humility." Mama Ngozi's head hung low. "And before the ancestors, and before the people of Umuaka," the elder added, "you must ask forgiveness from Chiamaka." All eyes turned toward the two women. For a long moment, Mama Ngozi remained still. Then slowly, painfully, she stepped forward. "I was wrong," she murmured. "Jealousy clouded my heart." Her voice cracked as she spoke. "I ask your forgiveness." Chiamaka looked at the older woman quietly. The pain in her chest was deep, but something stronger lived inside her heart. Compassion. After a moment, she nodded gently. "I forgive you," she said. A soft murmur of approval spread through the crowd. Not long after, Obinna returned from Lagos and heard everything that had happened. Shame filled his heart when he realized the suffering his wife had endured while he was away. He held Chiamaka tightly and promised that from that day forward, she would never face such trials alone again. But perhaps the person the villagers spoke about most after that day was not Chiamaka. It was little Chidubem, the boy who had stood before the entire village and spoken the truth without fear. Many elders began to say that the ancestors had truly placed their sight within his eyes. Because sometimes justice does not arrive through the powerful. Sometimes it arrives through the smallest voice. And so the people of Umuaka remembered an important lesson. Jealousy may dig traps for others, but truth always finds a way to escape. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. And tell us, where in the world are you watching from?